Hi, folks. In this video, we discuss the main characters of the film The Third Man and their existential positions. Before we talk about them, let me see if you can decide for yourselves whether you think you would side with Da Vinci or cuckoo clocks if you had to choose. Okay, hopefully you made up your philosophical minds because this is a kind of litmus test that the character Harry Lime, played by Orson Welles, gives us in the middle of the film. What I'm talking about is his famous speech when they're up in the Ferris wheel looking at all of the tiny little people below. This has to do with whether or not we depend on others and whether or not we're going to share and tie our freedom and our futures with others, or whether we think that what we owe is just something to ourselves and not to any other people. Well, we're going to get to the character of Harry Lime in a minute. Let's talk about Holly Martins first. So these are the four main characters that I want to focus on the film. And the perspective of the most of the film is the character Holly Martins. This is the Joseph Cotten character, who is the American writer who's traveled recently to Vienna in order to meet up with his old buddy Harry Lime because of a letter he received. Well, Holly Martins is a really funny character. He's the perspective of the audience. The story is told through him. And so there's many ways in which conventional filmmaking would invite us to identify with this character. He's also the person who is trying to discover a mystery. He's trying to solve these murder mysteries and figure out what's going on. And since that's the place of the audience as well, when we start a movie, we're in the place of limited information and we're trying to piece it together all along. And so in detective style movies, it's very natural for the audience to identify with the character who is solving the crime. But in a lot of ways, we are totally alienated from the character Holly Martins, and the film consistently undermines his perspective. Anna, the main female character in the film, at one point derides Holly, by saying honest, sensible, sober, harmless Holly Martins. And she says this in sort of a sarcastic tone. He's a bit of a dupe and a bore. That's what she's saying. There's a lot of irony here because, she calls him sensible, but in many ways he's a complete fool and he doesn't have a lot of common sense. She calls him sober, but he's drunk consistently. The way he deals with failure is to go hit the bottle. So he's actually not sober in many places in the film. Harmless, there is a way in which he's completely ineffectual. And I think that's what a lot of these comments are getting at. But ironically, he's also not harmless. He gets a couple of people killed in the film. And because of his incompetence and the bumbling way that he tries to solve this crime. And so instead of being the heroic detective character who the audience, really wants to identify with, he's a pretty incompetent main character who is consistently undermined throughout the film. And what we want to understand is, what is the film telling us because of that? He's so boring. He's such a dope that even the cat doesn't want to play with him. Did you notice it's so easy to miss some of these subtle details? He's trying to drag these little strings down from the flowers he brought Anna, which she just rebuked. And then he at least tries to save some face and play with the cat and entertain the cat. The cat doesn't even give him the time of day and walks away. Of course, what Anna says is, oh, that cat loved Harry Lime. So Holly Martins is continually being compared to the character of Harry Lime and found wanting. So some of the other aspects of his character that are significant. Of course, here's him, drinking his woes away. He does play the role of the clueless American in Europe. He doesn't speak any of the languages that he needs in order to get by. He's completely reliant on others. He's an author, but he's not a famous novelist. He actually writes pulp westerns, and they're sort of trashy. They're not considered like great fiction. And so he doesn't actually get a lot of success and fulfillment from his work. That's why there's some sort of subtle hints about the backstory and why he actually ended up meeting up with Harry Lime here. And partly it's because he's not finding a lot of success back in America. And he even doesn't respect himself from his own work when he engages in these self-reflective moments. He's not very competent at being a detective. He's trying to solve and dispel these murders and solve these crimes throughout the case, but basically other people have to do it for him. Of course, he attempts to strike up a romance with Anna, who has had a past relationship with Harry Lime, and that fails as well. In spectacular fashion, actually, at the end of the film, which I'll talk about in a separate video. So let's move on from the character of Holly Martins, and talk about Anna Schmidt. I'm curious what you think about the position of Anna. because she is really a fascinating philosophical character. Pause your videos and try to decide which of these best fits her, in your opinion. Okay, let's talk about Anna. I think Anna is an amazing character because she has a kind of meaning in her life, but it's also in a bit of a devastation because she has lost Harry Lime. So she immediately makes me think of the woman from Nevers. And that's why I think she bears a lot of marks of a Knight of Resignation. But I definitely don't think that she's a tragic hero, although there's ways in which her relationship with Harry and then the social demands on her create a kind of tragedy in her life. I don't think she's lower immediacy. She doesn't have a pure, passionate fling with Harry Lime or something. It's a deeply existential, fulfilling, meaningful relationship that she has with him. And the question is, what exactly is its nature? I think it is deeply Kierkegaardian. And so in my opinion, either she is a Knight of Faith or a Knight of Resignation. It depends upon how you read her position to the existence of Harry Lime or not. My final assessment, okay, I won't tell you my final assessment now. Let me talk about a few of the reasons why I think that it's a deeply Kierkegaardian commitment. Look at the ways in which she talks about how devastated she is with the loss of Harry Lime. This is how she is unmoored by his death and the news of his death. I've been frightened and alone before. I've been without friends and without money, but nothing has felt like this to me, she says. So her relationship with Harry is identity defining. Hawley at one point, this is the sense in which he's such a dupe. He doesn't get it. He simply cannot possibly understand her existential position. He says, don't worry, you'll get over it. You'll fall in love again, as if what she needs is to get over her grief. That is not what she needs whatsoever. That is not what the person of a Kierkegaardian commitment actually needs. As she says, I don't ever want to get over this. So that is big Knight of Resignation talk, in my opinion. Or if she believes on the strength of the absurd that Harry is still alive, then that would be a kind of Knight of Faith possibility even. So I think in either way, she's got to be one of those Kierkegaardian characters. Let me say, notice the lighting here, of course. Here we have the chiaroscuro lighting again that I was talking about in the formal features video. Look at her face and then this monogram. And of course, you're not paying attention enough if you don't notice that the letters HL, she's wearing Harry Lime's monogrammed clothing. So clearly, this is again the sense in which her identity is wrapped up in this relationship. In a wonderful bit of screenwriting, in my opinion, it's even her identity papers are dependent on him. This is such an amazing metaphor. Her whole Kierkegaardian identity is wrapped up in this relationship, and it comes across even in the plot of the story. It's just absolutely wonderful. And again, this talk about how she's essentially dead now, or she wishes she were dead. If she's not already spiritually dead, this again makes me think that this is a Kierkegaardian commitment that has led to devastation, and she has become a Knight of Resignation, even in the way in which the actor plays this, very the affect of her character and being very reserved, like a character going through grief, is like a character in Resignation. And this is one of the most fascinating lines, because you might have noticed, of course, the twist in the film is that Harry Lime is not dead. It was somebody else who got buried in the coffin. And that's why we have that spectacular stage entrance by Orson Welles in the middle of the film. But when she learns of this news, isn't this fascinating? She doesn't react as if this is joyous, because once a Kierkegaardian character has had their ultimate commitment destroyed or taken from them, they either have to live with the idea of it or they have to be eradicated. If they're a Knight of Faith, then they are literally eradicated. If they make the movement of resignation, then the idea enough is alone. And if you become resigned like that, you can't then get Isaac back. Abraham can't take Isaac back if he would just stay in the moment of resignation. And she says precisely this. Even if he is alive, I don't want to see him anymore. I don't want to hear him. She can't. The actual Harry Lime is now no longer even part of the significance she has and the meaning in her life. It's merely the idea of him. And as she says, he's a part of me. But it's the idea. It's so perfectly Kierkegaardian as a Knight of Resignation. So that's really what I think of her character. And it's, of course, through that lens of resignation that which we see some of the other characters. So I think the cat's complete lack of interest in Holly really becomes a metaphor for Anna's lack of interest in Holly as well. Holly can't possibly mean anything to her because she has a different kind of existential positioning in life. So my sense of the character of Anna is that she's a deeply Kierkegaardian character. And I feel like it's one of resignation, although I think it's interesting to wonder whether or not she could also be a knight of faith. When you look at, the fact that Harry Lime is still alive, almost like it's on the strength of the absurd, and some of those scenes later on in the film. But I'll leave you to think about that and see if you want to disagree with me. Harry Lime, let's move on to the next character. What do you think about him? What's his existential positioning? So pause your videos and try to assess Harry. Okay, I already gave this away perhaps in my discussion of the formal features. I, of course, think Harry is a completely Nietzschean character. And what's so wonderful about this film is I think this film actually melds together all of these different philosophical positions at one time. And we have elements of Kierkegaard side by side with Nietzsche. And we see what it means to be a Nietzschean in a relationship with a Kierkegaardian or vice versa. But we also have this position of Dostoevsky or Beauvoir, I think, too. And I'll say later on why I think that's so. The most famous scene, of course, from Harry Lime, and we really see his philosophical stance come across, is this really famous scene from the Ferris wheel. I reproduced for you some of this long dialogue that only an actor like Orson Welles could have delivered. Would you feel pity for any of those dots who stopped moving? This is just the Nietzschean thing. Nietzsche actually writes all the time about pity and how pity is deeply problematic and tied to certain kind of religious ways of making meaning. And instead, that's the kind of thing that we need to move beyond. Interestingly, Holly actually brings up religion and God. So this becomes the relationship and the meaning of the death of God become quite significant here. And in fact, what he gives is this line that reminds me of Ivan so much from the Brothers Karamazov. Oh, I do believe in God. I do believe in God and mercy and all that, but the dead are happier dead. It's better off for them anyway. So in a sense, this is a really backhanded way of believing in God. This is so much like Ivan saying, oh, it's not God I reject. I just return him the ticket. In a sense, Lime is saying, I don't even need to reject God. None of that matters to me. And therefore, I can do whatever I want. The line when I asked you to decide between Cuckoo Clocks and Da Vinci's, of course, that's the Nietzschean litmus test, perhaps, whether or not all of the strife and the conflict caused by the will to power in the world is actually redeemed by some exemplary individuals, or exemplary creations. What's so perfect about the comparison is Da Vinci is, of course, an artist, among many other things. And whether or not great art and transcending, doing maybe ethically transcendent things, going beyond good and evil is redeemed by the fact that you made something great artistically out of it, maybe out of your life. And Harry Lime precisely espouses this kind of Nietzschean position where perhaps great art does come out of suffering and you have to be willing to stomp on all those little ants down below. But if we create great things and create new values, then that in a sense justifies all of that. Whereas universal ethical concern, all that does is just create this leveling where everything becomes, equally mediocre. And his hilarious metaphor for this is the cuckoo clock in Switzerland. It's an amazing speech, and it really highlights both, I think, what is attractive and what is repulsive about Nietzsche, and makes it such a difficult existential decision. So this is my assessment of the character Harry Lime. I mean, I really think he is a Nietzschean free spirit, a fascinating character in many ways. One of the reasons why I just love this film so much is there is so much fascinating existential philosophy combined, all just put together and juxtaposed in amazing ways here. I think also you can of course see Harry Lime from not a Nietzschean perspective, but a Kierkegaardian one. And that's what makes this a kind of synthesizing film to have at the end of the quarter. I think From Kierkegaard's perspective, Harry Lime is just a moral monster. He's the person who is not in teleological suspension of the ethical. He is the person who is returning to lower immediacy and is just engaging in sin. He has not even met the ethical universal bar. He is the immoral person in the way in which the heroic knight of faith is not. Let me last say the character of Major Calloway is really important, and I will talk about him in the next video some more. In my opinion, what he represents is the kind of moral center. He's the person who actually cares about society. He is on the side of the military police and keeping law and order in a good way. Remember, Holly Martins is the Western American writer. And so there's all these references to like Wild West sheriffs and whatnot, and vigilante justice and things like this. So this is a great sort of metafictional commentary on the characters in the film. And I think what Major Calloway represents is like the good sheriff, the good person who holds up social order. So he is like the Hegelian universal, and in that way contrasts with the lower immediacy of Harry Lime or the higher immediacy of Anna Schmidt. And in many ways, the Holly character is, I think, the incompetent sheriff, or the sheriff the Western sheriff who actually thinks they uphold the universal, or attempts to uphold the universal, but just does it in an unsuccessful manner. So I think Major Calloway in many ways is actually like the ethical hero of the film. Remember, even he has sort of tragedy. I don't think he's a tragic hero because he doesn't have to face those kinds of decisions, Agamemnon type decisions, but he nonetheless has tragedy in his life when his lieutenant is killed at the end of the film. So he represents the ethical in a deep way, in my opinion. Okay, thanks.